Today, we discuss week 2 studs and duds, who the Dynasty tight end one is, some buy low targets. Stick around for all that and more. Welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. My name is JP. I'm joined by David here. No Justin this week, but today we are going to review all of the games from week 2. And we had some fun ones. And I got to say, Monday Night Football made me pretty darn happy. I think you're pretty happy too, though, David.
Pretty surprising win, and got to give Matt LaFleur a ton of credit on that one for sure.
And for you guys who don't know, I'm a Falcons fan. He is a Packers fan. We're all smiles today. But let's go ahead and talk about Thursday Night Football. The Bills at Dolphins. The Bills crushed the Dolphins with a 31-10 win. And we had some studs at running back with James Cook. He had 28.5 fantasy points. Devon Achane also had a big game with 29.5. So those guys were fantastic, but outside of them, there weren't a whole lot of other great fantasy pieces in this game. At least for this week, they kind of disappointed. Like guys like Josh Allen, he had 11 fantasy points. I mean, it was game script. He had a big week 1. We know he's great. That's whatever. Tua, he had 3 picks with only 145 yards and 1 touchdown. So if he was in your lineup, you don't feel too great, especially because how that game ended with the concussion. But we'll talk a little bit about that more. Tyreek Hill, a big dud here with 5.4 points. If you were relying on him, that is a big loss probably this week if you didn't have other blowups. And Keon Coleman didn't have a single catch. They didn't really need him, though. So not overly concerned, just a little bit on Keon.
Obviously, the big thing we got to talk about first is that Tua concussion. It looked bad. We saw the fencing response. It's really hard to speculate as to how he'll recover, when he'll recover, if he'll play again. I don't know him. I don't know his doctors. I'm not a doctor, so we're just kind of all going to have to watch that. There's a sports medicine doctor that I follow on YouTube and Twitter. His name is Brian Suterer. Doesn't really do fantasy stuff, but he breaks down big injuries really well, I think. And he kind of mentioned that sometimes really bad concussions aren't as bad, and sometimes the not bad looking ones are worse than you think. He also said there's not really a set number of concussions or before you're not going to be cleared to return. It's only one doctor's opinion, so it's hard to know, but just a little extra context there. I kind of think you don't have a choice but to hold them. I don't know if you should buy them or sell them right now. I think we'd probably start with that conversation, though. JP, you got anything to add to the Tua discussion?
I mean, I would be pretty scared to buy him personally because I tell you what, I mean, we've said this before, but I mean, if he gets one more,
You just never know.
I would be pretty darn concerned because I already had him kind of as a sell anyways, just because he led the league in passing yards last year and he still wasn't a top 12 quarterback. But now there's just so much risk involved. I mean, if you can get him at like a real big discount, somebody's really freaking out, sure, I could pounce at that opportunity. But yeah, I don't think you're really going to get a great return either. So I think he's somebody you just got to hold, like you said. And it looks like he's on IR and is going to be out until I think it was week 8 or 9. So yeah, looks like we're going to get some Skylar Thompson and some Tyler Huntley. Maybe you can start those guys in a super flex if you really need to. They are throwing it to Waddle and Tyreek, so maybe, but still, they're not great quarterbacks. If you have a better option, I would start them.
Still think all three, Tyreek, Waddle, and a chain, are lineup blocks while Tua's out, or got to rethink Waddle maybe a little?
That would be the one, yeah, because I think Achane is probably pretty safe. I think they're probably going to get a lot of first read targets to Tyreek Hill, and his big plays might be limited, but I think he'll still get some shots. He's incredible, but yeah, he's probably not top 3 wide receiver the rest of the way, but maybe when Tua returns later, but he's still wide receiver 1 probably. He might be closer to the edge of wide receiver 1, 2. But yeah, Waddle is a little bit more concerning for sure. I think he's more in that flex category now. And hopefully you guys have somebody better because I'm a little bit worried about Waddle right now.
Yeah, kind of hard not to be worried about all of them. I do think if you're rebuilding, maybe Waddle's a good buy low. Probably not going to produce a ton this year. You got to think whether it's Tua or someone else, they'll have a better quarterback situation going into next season. Other side of the ball, like you said, Allen didn't really have to do much. It was a dud game fantasy-wise, but it's not like he played poorly. It did reflect Keon Coleman 0 catches, but he played a ton. I think we saw 91% snap share there. I think the big takeaway here is it looks like Josh Allen doesn't have to play hero ball anymore. They have James Cook, and he looks pretty good. So, we might see a few games where we used to see Allen putting up big slot points at the end. We might not see those this year. Maybe it hurts his ceiling a smidge, but I mean, he's still a top 3 quarterback by the end of the season, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100% agree. They went up on this Dolphins team super early, so they really did not need to throw the ball. They had success running the ball as well, so they just stuck to doing that. James Cook, he had a huge day, right? But he only had 47% of snaps. It was only on 12 touches. I'm pretty sure they pulled him early though. But I don't know. I'm not saying he's like a top three running back just because of this performance. Like I said, it was off 12 touches. It was mostly touchdown based, but he is very involved. So it is encouraging. You can start him every week, obviously. Keon Coleman, like you said, he's on the field. I don't know how much you can take away from week two, but week one was pretty encouraging. I'm not the biggest fan of him personally, but Shakir looks very involved. Dalton Kincaid, they seem like they were making a point early in the game to get him involved as well. Still, he might be a little bit disappointing, Dalton Kincaid, for what we might have hoped for, but I think he's still a guy that you're going to want to start every single week. And he could start to have, a better season as he starts to get a better rapport with Josh Allen. He's only in his second year, and they might need him in those games where they have to throw a lot.
Yeah, Kincaid's definitely been a little disappointing, but kind of the whole tight end position has for the most part. Really hard to imagine a situation where you've got a better option on your team right now, unless you just went heavy tight end bully kind of thing, which I guess in some situations maybe you have that, but I'm still rolling them out there the one place I have them. So just kind of got to deal with it, I think.
Definitely.
Moving on to the morning slate. First game we're going to talk about Raiders at Ravens. Raiders get a surprising win here, 26-23. Really surprised by that one, to be honest. Ravens starting out 0-2. Looking at the fantasy studs, Zay Flowers bounce back game from week one wasn't so good. Week two had 22 points. Devontae Adams being Devontae Adams, 26 points. Brock Bowers, man, he looked like a big part of that offense. 9 catches, 98 yards. Derrick Henry definitely bounced back a little from week one. Had 16 points. Not a great outing, but certainly not something you're worried about. Players who did not do so well, likely, after week one, everyone was hyped on him. He probably was the most fab in your league if he was available. Only 4.6 points. Zamir White didn't do much. 9 carries, 24 yards, 3 catches, 14. Saw him miss a lot of holes. He's kind of what we expected. Volume dependent, touchdown dependent, not very good. Yeah, those are kind of the studs and duds. You got any interesting places to start this conversation here on the game?
Yeah, Zay Flowers. I mean, last week it was kind of discouraging his output because a lot of his completions were really short. But Zay Flowers, I mean, he was really involved in week one. I pointed out he had double-digit targets, and I counted at least 4 that were negated to penalties. So he would have had 14 plus targets. But he's very highly involved again with double-digit targets in week two, and he's on pace for 178 targets, and that's not even counting the negated targets. So yeah, he is very involved in this offense, and he looks like a guy that I'm certainly going to be starting every single week. And I mean, there's going to be games where the Ravens have a big lead, and he's going to see less targets. And they're not going to need him, just like we saw with Josh Allen and the Bills. They didn't need to throw the ball. But I'm starting Zay Flowers every single week, and I'm really encouraged from what I've seen so far. Mark Andrews, he was more involved after being double teamed. You guys mentioned last week, I mean, he was double teamed at an absurd rate by the Chiefs in week one, and he's bounced back. He had a decent game. I mean, it wasn't huge, but he was more involved than likely this week, which has to give you a little bit of encouragement if you are a Mark Andrews owner. I'm still going to be starting him. And Brock freaking Bowers, dude, crazy. So when you compare him to Michael Mayer, right? Mayer had 4 targets through 2 weeks. Bowers has 17. He's clearly the go-to tight end in the receiving game. And Devontae Adams has 18 targets through 2 weeks. So Bowers has only 1 fewer target. And this is an offense that we were kind of discouraged to see Bowers go to, but throw it out the window because they are throwing him the ball a whole lot. And I want to talk about him a little bit more and his value later. But the last point I want to make on the Raiders was Jacoby Myers. Because of how involved Brock Bowers is, I don't really want to start Jacoby Myers in my flex, even because he is the number 3 target on a team that I don't expect to be scoring a lot of points. If you need him in a pinch, sure, you can flex him out. I think he's a good wide receiver, but he's not somebody I want to rely on for Gardner Minshew's number 3 target.
Yeah, I don't think we ever want to have to rely on Gardner Minshew's number 3 target. I think, look, man, like you said, Bowers 17 targets through 2 weeks to Adams 18. Does seem like maybe Minshew can support both of them, though. I think at least at this point, they're both lineup locks. Hard to imagine situations where you've got better guys on your bench. That's a surprising team right now. Maybe not the most surprising on the season so far, but definitely looks maybe like a little bit more competent of an offense than we thought. Early sample size, though, so let's see how this plays out. I think on the other side of the ball, Andrews, it was nice to see him being a little more involved, but still not quite where we want it. Only 2 weeks so far into the season, so I'm not giving up on him, but I had very high hopes for him, and he's so far not delivered there. And man, Zay Flowers on pace for 178 targets. Whew, hard to not put up numbers if you get targeted like that. I'm sure that pace won't continue, but it's got to be close. 150 is probably not out of his reach. Definitely exciting if you've got some Zay Flowers like we both do. Yeah, we didn't really mention Lamar here. He's Lamar. You're playing him. Kind of the same thing with Henry for now. Like we said, Henry didn't have a terrific game, but he had a solid game. So, Ravens slow start, but for fantasy, Dynasty, I'm still playing the studs I have there.
Not a whole lot has changed there. The only person I'm really concerned is a player that I was concerned about early in the season, which I talked down pretty hard, was Zamir White. His offense is looking a little better than what I expected, but still, he's not doing a whole lot. And I mentioned last week he's not the pass catching back. He had 3 catches surprisingly, but only went for 14 yards. So I don't know that he's really making a case to be more involved. So yeah, it's tough to start him going forward. Moving on to the Chargers at Panthers. The Chargers squashed the Panthers 26-3. With fantasy studs, we have J.K. Dobbins. Boy, oh boy, he looks like a healthy version of himself once again for rushing over 130 yards and a touchdown. And surprisingly, Quentin Johnston, 2 touchdowns. Wow, they look like they're trying to involve him. I don't expect him to have 2 touchdowns maybe any other week this year, but who knows? Fantasy duds. Honestly, the entire Carolina Panthers team was a dud. Chuba Hubbard, he was the only guy who had over 5.3 fantasy points. Yeah, that's pretty scary. That offense looks atrocious. And we have the news now that Bryce Young, he's going to sit. I just want to go ahead and talk about that because Andy Dalton's going to come in, and I'm sure Justin's probably doing backflips with his Deontay Johnson shares. Has some sort of hope for Deontay because, I mean, when we saw Andy Dalton most recently, he threw a lot. They seemed like they trusted him more than, of course, different coaching staff, but they seem like they trust him more than Bryce Young. And I mean, he's seen a lot more. And I just think that I actually would consider buying Deontay Johnson if he comes discounted because I think Deontay Johnson's really good. And if you have a guy who's at least competent, because Bryce Young has not looked competent, then I'm somewhat interested in Deontay Johnson, maybe Xavier Legette. Who knows? But at least if you have Jonathan Brooks, I have a little bit of hope for the offense to at least be not the worst in the NFL. But how do you feel about that whole Carolina Panthers team?
Kind of hard to imagine starting any of them right now. There's definitely a chance moving to Dalton helps. But one thing it's not going to help is that offensive line, and Dalton's less mobile than Bryce. So going to be very concerning until we see it out there. But, we've seen like Flacco last year. We've seen Minshew this year so far. We've seen these veteran guys who can chuck it around a bit, at least good enough for our fantasy weapons. So I have a little bit of hope. I do think if you can buy low on Deontay, that might be worth exploring. Like you said, I have a little bit more hope for when Brooks comes back now. But man, it's just a dumpster fire there. We were talking about this off air. If you can buy Bryce for really low, like I don't even know if I'd pay a second right now, maybe a third, maybe a little more, I guess, just because. But it looks like he might be done there. I mean, you don't bench your number one overall pick 2 games into his second year with a new coach, new weapons, all this, unless he's maybe lost the locker room or you're not going back to him probably. Maybe there's an injury we're not sure of, but I haven't heard any sniff of that. So I don't think that's it. I think it's hard to believe in Bryce. It's hard to believe in any Panther right now.
Yeah, I really don't want to be starting any of them. Maybe Deontay Johnson if I see some life from this team next week. Yeah, Jonathan Brooks, I probably would not have invested in him as much in redraft if I knew this offense was going to be this bad. But looking over at the Chargers, Ladd McConkey, he only had 2 receptions, but they didn't really need him because they were up 21-0 at half. I guess it was 20-0 actually. But Gus Edwards, he got a lot of work, but only 5.9 fantasy points, which does not help much because he didn't get a touchdown and he didn't get any targets. He had 18 carries though. J.K. Dobbins had 17 carries. So they're getting about the same amount of work, but Dobbins has 7.7 yards per carry in this game compared to Gus Edwards' 3.3. So we've already seen Dobbins get a little bit more work from week 1, and I wouldn't be surprised if they keep giving him more and more work. It's kind of shocking that they still gave Gus Bus 18 carries, but J.K. Dobbins is definitely a guy that I would be comfortable starting, and Gus Edwards probably not, because this was a game script against the Panthers. He got a ton of carries, and he still was a dud. You would expect hopefully a touchdown or something, but yeah, I cannot start Gus Edwards, and J.K. Dobbins looks really interesting.
Yeah, kind of hard to leave Dobbins out of your lineup at this point. I wonder if the return from injuries maybe why Gus is still getting that many carries, especially with the familiarity with Roman there. I kind of think it's going to start changing, though. It's really hard to imagine it not changing with the difference in efficiency between those two. I don't know if you can even buy low on Dobbins right now. I genuinely don't know what his market price is. And it's a risky buy, but man, it's also a huge upside buy. Is he this year's Kyron? This year's Kyron, whatever you want to, kind of guy who had nothing before the season is potentially a league winner. And then, with Ladd, he missed some time in training camp. Herbert missed a lot of time in training camp. So they're probably still building that rapport. Definitely a disappointing outing. Would have liked to see him on the field a little bit more. He's on the field about half the snaps. I'm still not giving up on him, but I'm also not starting him. I don't think you can really start any of those weapons right now. Herbert even is hard to start, but you might have to, I guess, depending on your roster. I have confidence that they're going to grow as a team. I just don't know how fast. And then Quentin Johnson, like you said, he might not even have two more touchdowns the rest of the season, but it's worth monitoring. He looked very involved. Don't want to get stuck on our priors there with him, but it's going to take a little bit more for me to move off of them.
Yeah, I have at least somewhat of in mind that he's at least graduated from the roster clogger tier potentially, but still don't want to start him. We'll see if he actually gets out of that tier. But yeah, Lad McConkey and Justin Herbert, I think both of them. You're playing against the Panthers, and this team is so run heavy. I think when they're playing a team like the Bills, the Chiefs, some of these teams that you know they can put up points, I'd be interested in starting them, but man, when they're playing a bad team, I don't want to. I don't want to play Justin Herbert even as super flex. I mean, but you probably have to, honestly. And whatever. I mean, if Derek Carr's your QB3 and you can put him in ahead of Herbert, I wouldn't mind doing that. Even Baker Mayfield. It's all matchup dependent, but I think Herbert will get it rolling a little bit more than what we have seen. I mean, they played the Panthers and the Raiders, so they haven't really needed to throw the ball a whole lot. Lad McConkey, I'm hoping it's just that. I'm not like you said, I'm not trying to start him right now, but I'm at least open minded to him being a starter or a flex option here. You know, in a few weeks if we see a little bit more.
I think that's about where I'm at with those guys. Let's move on to the Saints at the Cowboys. This has to be the biggest shocker for me overall on the season. Saints went 44-19. They've scored 40 plus both weeks, I think, right? I mean, week one, they played the Panthers. It looked okay, they're playing the Panthers, whatever. This week they played the Cowboys, man. Hard to ignore at this point. Very small sample size, but very surprising team. Mara looks like he's still in his prime somehow. 180 total yards, 4 touchdowns. Won me a week where I had a bunch of other duds. Thank you, Alvin. Rashid Shaheed, another huge touchdown, 19.6 fantasy points. He's definitely a big, boomer bust guy, but he's booming a lot. So hard to leave him out of the lineup. CD hit on a long touchdown, 19 fantasy points. Kind of what we expect from him, but happy to see it. On the other side, we had Zeke, only 32 total yards, no touchdowns. Brandon Cooks, after a good week one, only 2 targets, 19. Dak wasn't awful, but he definitely was not good, which is kind of surprising considering how, they were playing behind like the whole time. But like I said, probably the most surprising game of the week for me and certainly most surprising team of the season so far.
Yeah, this whole Zeke versus Dowdle situation is just anyone's guess from week to week. Hopefully, Dowdle will be the guy who starts to emerge because he doesn't have over 2,000 career carries on his body. So I would hold on to Dowdle and that for that hope, but I won't hold on a whole lot longer. Yeah, Zeke, I don't think I could trust him. I'm not putting him in my lineup. Neither one of these guys, but Jalen Tolbert, pretty interesting. He had 9 targets, and who knows which guy is the wide receiver two between Brandon Cooks and Tolbert. Hopefully, one of these guys can clearly separate as the wide receiver two because we expect this to be a pretty good offense with Dak Prescott behind center. But I might be interested in putting Tolbert in a lineup if I see at least one more involved a week like this. I mean, 9 targets, that's a lot. That's pretty shocking. And the Saints can't keep getting away with this, can they?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy, man. Olave, I'm not panicking on. If you can buy low, great, but he had a good enough week. I don't know if that'll happen. Like you said, Carr might be the MVP front runner, which is crazy to think about. You can play your Saints. You can play Kamara for sure every week. You have to. Olave, you can play. Shaheed, I think you're going to play. Carr, you're probably trying to work into your lineup right now. And on the other side, like you said, in the receiver two battle, whatever you want to call it, is interesting, especially with Ferguson out. I do need to see at least one more week from Tolbert before I even consider starting him, though. It's been a very inconsistent start to his career. I did like him as a prospect. Maybe he can come on a little late here and actually start establishing a role. That'd be awesome. I'm rooting for him, but want to see a little bit more. Can't start Cooks right now. I'm not starting Zeke or Dowdle until I see something. And as long as I can avoid it, maybe you have to start one of them somewhere or something. But Dak and CD, yeah, lock them in every week. Can't say enough about how surprised I am about the Saints so far. I did think they were going to be a bad team this year, and it looks like they might a contender. We'll see.
Yep, I don't like to see that personally. But moving on to another team in the NFC South, we have the Buccaneers at Lions, and another surprising NFC South win with the Bucks taking this win 20-16. And this was a pretty fun game. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he bounced back in a huge way with a 19 target game. He had no touchdown, but he's still a stud because of all that volume that he got. JMO, he got 14.4 fantasy points. He was the wide receiver 22. He had 11 targets, only came away with 5 of those, but he still had a great week. Jahmyr Gibbs, he had 17.6 points, so you're happy with that. Montgomery, also had 17, and largely because of a touchdown. You know what Montgomery likes to do. Chris Godwin, another big week from Chris Godwin, and his value's got to be rising because he had 117 yards and a touchdown. Baker Mayfield, he was a QB5 on the week, and it was only 19.8 fantasy points. Good week, but QB5, that seems crazy. But Baker Mayfield is looking really good. It's good to see. The fantasy duds, we have Laporta. Only 2 catches for 13 yards. Rashad White, he had a groin injury. Hopefully he's nothing serious, but even in the touches he had, it was only 10 for 18 on the ground. So he definitely hurt you. He hurt me in a lineup. Mike Evans, it just wasn't his week. Chris Godwin had the week this week, and they might kind of bounce him back and forth, but he had 7.2 fantasy points. But if Rashad White, I need to get more news on that. Bucky Irving would be a pretty interesting start if you do have him. I might be willing to flex him. Probably would start him over the Zeke and Dowdle situation. Because Bucky Irving, he has looked pretty good. But boy, if Jameson Williams is going to be this involved, we might have to start to reconsider our thoughts on him. And also, I think we might have to reconsider our thoughts on Laporta a little bit, because if Laporta is going to be the third target and Gibbs is going to be also very involved, and it's going to be a run heavy team. We saw what Laporta's able to do last year when he's highly involved, but I mean, 3.3 fantasy points this week wasn't spectacular week one fantasy points wise either. So are you worried about Sam Laporta at all? I'm sure you're still starting him though, but how worried are you?
Yeah, I mean, you got to be starting him. Definitely have to be worried as well. I think he's still going to have his weeks for sure. But look, I think the main conversation I want to have from this game is about Jameson Williams. I've been pretty low on him his whole career. I've certainly thought he was overhyped coming out. I think he's a good player, but I had my concerns. They kind of were squished over the last couple weeks. I don't know if a single player has risen more in my personal rankings than he has. I don't have numbers to it, but just my perception of him. I was very out on him, and now I'm so much so thinking about being in on him. I'm going to ask you a few players, and these names might be surprising. They're all ranked below him currently on Keep Trade Cut. So I want you to tell me who you'd prefer straight up: Jameson Williams, Jordan Addison.
Man, I'm the low guy on Jordan Addison, but I would definitely start Jameson Williams this year over Addison.
Jameson Williams, Lad McConkey.
I'm gonna stick with Lad because I think he can be the first target there.
I think that's about where I have it with those two, and then these next two are kind of surprising. I think, especially after the week Jason had. This one is, I think we'll agree on Jason or Jameson Williams.
JSN, yeah.
Yeah, I'm there too. Now, this one, considering how it was preseason, I think it's a little weird to ask, but considering how the season's gone, I mean, I think it makes sense. Jameson Williams, Michael Pittman Jr.
That's crazy. That's just crazy to think about. But
I mean,
Jameson Williams is younger, and you probably are more interested in starting him than Michael Pittman right now. Wow. That's just crazy to think about. I don't know if I would make that move, but boy, if I could sell Pittman for JMO and even a third, I'd probably do it at this point.
you might be able to get a small plus, but I think that's fair. And, I think part of the discussion there is how insulated his value feels. So many people are still high on him after two bad seasons to start his career.
It's true.
And he's starting to prove it. They're talking about him in big ways and they're using him in big ways. So, I mean, that's my big takeaway from this game. I think the other one is Rashad White versus Bucky Irving. Like you said, if White's out, Irving's definitely startable. I think if Irving gets a start, he might start taking that job too. So White better hope he's healthy, in my opinion.
Yeah, I will say with Bucky Irving's size, maybe they don't give him like the 80%, 70% touches. But I mean, he's been very efficient. If he gets even 60%, 65, he could still be good because I mean, this is a good offense. And I think Bucky Irving, when you're using him in the passing game and you're going to be efficient on the ground, yeah, he's pretty interesting. And if he really does perform really well, yeah, he's probably going to eat more and more into Rashad White's workload. But I have heard the head coach say this is Rashad White's role going into the season and after week one as well. They seem to really like Rashad White, but their mind could be changed a little bit if Bucky really starts to pop.
Definitely something interesting to monitor. Let's go ahead and move on to our next game. Colts at Packers. My Packers take a very exciting for us, but not so exciting for non-fans of the Packers. 16-10 win, very ground dominant, great coaching effort in my opinion. But as far as fantasy goes, not a lot of studs to talk about, unfortunately. Pretty much the only guy I want to mention here is Alec Pierce, 16.6 PPR points, wide receiver 20. I mean, he's starting to get to the point where you think about starting him. I do think it's been a weird start to that offense, though, so I'm not quite there. As far as the duds, though, A-Rich only 12.9, Pittman only 5.1, Jaden Reed only 6.6. He did have a couple of rushes still, which we like to see. And then Christian Watson, very boomer bust, but boy, was it a bust this week. He didn't even have a target. It's kind of hard to start him when you're going to have weeks where you're not going to get targeted. Once Love comes back, I'm back in on him probably. But as long as Love's out, it's hard to start these wide receivers outside of Reed. Even there, it's kind of questionable.
Yeah, Reed, Jacobs, those are the guys that I'd be comfortable starting. Musgrave has been a little bit disappointing. We saw Tucker Kraft was pretty involved week one. This week it's hard to take away anything from the passing game. But yeah, that's it. It's Jaden Reed, Josh Jacobs, and with especially with Marshawn Lloyd going to the IR, things are looking pretty good for Josh Jacobs. But what I really want to talk about is the Colts. right? This is wild. And honestly, this game did go by really fast. So the time of possession for the Colts, the amount of drives they had was very, very limited. So Anthony Richardson, right? You guys know I'm really, really high on him. Personally, I'm not like super, super scared because in a game where he threw 3 picks and they ran out the clock like crazy to get 12.9 points, it didn't like absolutely kill you. But I mean, he didn't look amazing. That he still has some of those errant passes, right? But I will say they had like 5 or 6 drops on the Colts. And I even looked down on Twitter this morning because I saw people talking about it. I was looked up Colts drops, which you can do, and yeah, there was at least 5, if not 6 drops. So the completion percentage looks worse on that front. But yeah, Alec Pierce, I don't know why, but they just seem to love using him. And Josh Downs, I think that Josh Downs coming back. I don't know if it's going to be this week. There's a possibility, it sounds like, but I think it's probably going to be week 4 or 5. I think Josh Downs would really help out this offense a lot because they've been using AD Mitchell in the slot a good bit, and they don't seem like they're on the same page. And AD Mitchell hasn't really played in the slot a whole lot. So I think when you have Pittman and Pierce on the outside and Josh Downs getting separation over the middle, I think that's really going to help Anthony Richardson. If Richardson also starts to develop more through the season, I mean, everybody talks about it, he's got like 19 career starts. AD Mitchell, he's a rookie as well. I think that things could start to improve for them. Of course, that's me being more optimistic. I think you can kind of have a takeaway on both ends. It's on some fronts. It's more negative in this game for sure. But I think Josh Downs would help for sure. But their next 2 games for the Colts, they have some really tough matchups. So we might not see that these 2 weeks. And there might be further concern potentially for Anthony Richardson with the defenses he's facing.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point about Downs. He definitely could become that security blanket that Richardson clearly needs. Like, I think the Packers just had a great game plan on offense, especially. They held the ball. They kind of kept the Colts from getting into rhythm. Defensively, they did a good job containing them. But like you said, there were some drops, and AD Mitchell had a really bad one. Kind of concerned about him, but he is young. He's growing with this offense. It's not like a panic moment for me with the Colts, but it's getting there. I'm not going to lie, it's getting there. I'm definitely concerned, but I wouldn't be selling low on my Colts players right now. I might sell Pittman if he has a good week or two, just because I haven't been super high on him before this slow start. But look, I'm definitely not selling Richardson low. No way. I'm gonna hold on to him. He's young, like you said, like what 19 career starts since high school. I think something like that might be plus or minus 1 or 2 there. But he just hasn't played much ball. He needs to learn. He needs to grow. He needs to see different defenses. I'm holding them. And with the Packers, again, it's really hard to take anything away from this because they did what they had to do to win with a quarterback who's been there 3 weeks. They can run the ball. Tucker Kraft's a heck of a blocker. Does that mean he's the tight end one over Musgrave? And I think it's trending that way, but is he worth starting? I don't think so. Yeah, I think that's about all I got on this game.
Anthony Richardson, I'm kind of viewing this as his rookie year, essentially. I mean, he's 22 years old. He's the same age as Caleb Williams. We've seen Bo Nix struggle, Caleb Williams struggle, Jane Daniels. He's been pretty good, but his ADOT's been really low. So I think that we should expect improvement throughout the year, but that's not a guarantee for sure. But moving on to the Browns at Jaguars. The Browns win 18-13. Fantasy studs. Deshaun Watson was a top 12 quarterback with only 15.4 fantasy points, but that's a stud 2024 NFL season with these touchdown numbers that we're seeing. But he was fine. He had a fine game, like I said. 15.4 points doesn't really win you a week, but it's fine. The duds, we have Amari Cooper, still had 8 targets, but only 3 catches for 11 yards, and he had an egregious drop. Him and Watson don't really seem to be on the same page. I mean, Cooper, he seems to be the clear-cut number 1 target, but not production-wise at all. So that's disappointing to see. Christian Kirk, another guy that was probably in the same range as Amari Cooper, less than 1 fantasy point. He had a catch for -1 yards. That's crazy because Evan Ingram was ruled out just before this game with a hamstring that he suffered in warmups, actually. So you would think that Christian Kirk, he would take all those short intermediate targets that Evan Ingram also absorbs. But I cannot believe that Christian Kirk has been this disappointing through 2 weeks. Tank Bigsby, he left with a shoulder injury. It looked like it was going to be more serious, but thankfully it doesn't appear. I think he should be back soon. ETN, a lineup lock. He had 14.8 fantasy points. He was RB20 on the week. And he looks fine, but last year he was just getting so many touches. And they've always told us, hey, we want to get ETN. We want to split up the carries. We want to split up this backfield, split it, split it. That's what they've been saying to us. And last year they didn't do it, but that's because Tank Bigsby was like absolutely atrocious. I think every time they gave him the ball, it was hurting them. So, but Tank Bigsby has looked way better. In week 1, he was way better than ETN. And it seems that they still don't want to give ETN the full workload, and his offense doesn't look that great. I think you're still starting ETN, But David, you posed this question in the doc. So what did you think about ETN?
Yeah, I think if Bigsby's out, you kind of have to start him. And to be honest, on most teams with most roster constructions, you probably still have to start ETN for now. It's definitely concerning, though. I almost bought him before the season started for a pretty high price, and I'm pretty glad that I didn't. I also have Jordan Mason on that team, so that's really helped fill in that void that I was trying to fill with ETN. But I would have been disappointed to this point. It's not been a great season. I think if Bigsby misses some time, you're going to be happy for a few weeks, but it sure seems like when he's healthy, that's going to be a bit of a split. And then, like you said, with Kirk, and that's pretty disappointing start. It's hard to start him in your lineup right now. I'm intrigued by Thomas. He didn't have a good enough game to make the studs list for this game, but it was a pretty good game. I think it was like 2 catches for 94 yards. He's probably the only guy outside of Etienne and Lawrence I'm even considering starting on that team right now. On the other side of the ball, yeah, Watson listed as a stud's a little bit disgusting, but considering his first week, it kind of felt like he had to be mentioned. I don't really know if I'm starting anyone on that team if I can avoid it. Even Amari Cooper having a down week. Jerry Judy looked all right, but I'm not at the point where I want to start him. Backfield split between Ford and Foreman. This is kind of an ugly game for fantasy.
Yeah, this is a pretty nasty game, and I probably won't spend a whole lot more time on it. And Brian Thomas Jr., he looks really good. Christian Kirk, do you think that would you consider buying him low? I mean, I would pay 2/3. I don't know if that'll get it done, but do you think some people might consider that with how disappointing he's been?
I mean, I might consider selling him for that if I had it. I wasn't as high as Kirk as you two were going into the season, and I know this is a small sample size to try to confirm my belief, but it's been a rough start. I don't think I can quite sell him for 2/3, but I might consider it if I was rebuilding.
Interesting. Now, what about J.K. Dobbins or ETN in your lineup?
I'm starting Dobbins over Etienne if that's my decision right now.
All right. I mean, Dobbins has looked good.
So moving on, next game, a little bit more exciting for fantasy, a little bit more to talk about here. We have the 49ers at the Vikings. Vikings taking a 23-17 win, a little bit surprising there. But we actually have some impressive performances to mention. Jordan Mason, 17.4 points. Kittle, the tight end one on the week, 20.6. Darnold, QB4, 20.9. Jefferson, who did leave with a quad injury. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. 23.3 points, huge touchdown. I think it was 97 yards. And I just want to mention because the Addison and Jefferson injuries, Naylor had 14.4 points on the week. Probably the guy you're most willing to start if those two miss any time. Then on the other side, we've got Ayuk only 8.3 points, little disappointing for sure. And then Aaron Jones 9.8. Let's start here. Mason, obviously a lineup block, right? I mean, he has to be.
Yeah, I mean, he might be a top 5 play at running back right now, honestly.
Want to talk injury here. Debo's going to probably miss a few weeks with a calf strain. With Debo and CMC out, we feel good about starting Ayuk. I know we kind of have to, but he's got a rebound, right?
Yeah, I feel great about it, honestly, because he didn't practice much throughout training camp, like at all. So I did kind of expect a slower start. And you know how I feel about Ayuk. I think he's one of the best wide receivers. And yeah, I'm definitely starting Ayuk. I was probably going to be starting him even with Debo in week 3 in a 3 wide receiver league. But yeah, I'm really excited about him for these next few weeks.
Unfortunately, I do think the injuries maybe make buying him low kind of difficult, but maybe worth reaching out. Look, just want to touch on this real quick. CMC on IR looks like he's going to miss a decent amount of time, even when he comes back. Probably not going to be a full workload. Can you sell him for anything close to what he's worth, or you just got to hold need it right now?
Man, I mean, this Achilles injury, this was lingering in the playoffs last year. That's what really has me worried. And it makes me almost think that Jordan Mason, he might be involved through the entirety of this season. And so I would actually be pretty inclined to buy Mason. CMC's value is definitely going to be down. Would I take a first? Probably, just because of his age, and we already worried about him falling off anyways, and this injuries just seems to be piling up. If you can get a first, I would probably do it. Maybe you can pivot to a guy like Jonathan Taylor. I doubt it at this point. Yeah, I would probably try to move CMC because I'm pretty concerned.
Yeah, I think if I could get a first where I have him, I would take it too. I've got a pretty deep team. The one place I have him, and it's just hard to have confidence. But let's go ahead and flip to the other side of the ball real quick before I ask the question I want to ask. Just want to touch on these injuries. Looks like Addison is going to miss a couple weeks with a high ankle sprain, and then Jefferson left with a quad injury. But it does sound like he has a pretty good shot to play this week. Certainly not a lock, so do monitor his practice status. But look, the question I want to ask is Darnold in this Vikings offense for real?
Man, I think Kevin O'Connell is just one of the best play callers, honestly. And if Jefferson's in the lineup, yeah, I mean, honestly, I would start him, probably would start him over Justin Herbert at this point, if unless it looks like it's going to be a shootout for Herbert. But he's got a great play caller. They're throwing the ball, they're efficient. Like I said, one of the best receivers in the league. I do think that there's a chance it regresses a little bit, but he looks pretty solid. I mean, he still has some of those like what when the world was that kind of throw, but he still will launched some crazy throws. I mean, that 97 yarder, that was deep, man. That was a crazy throw, like perfect pass. So yeah, I mean, if you have him on your team, I'm probably starting him in superflex leagues. Would you rather start him or would you rather start Brock Purdy going forward? Because no Debo, I do think that
That's an interesting question. That's not one I would expect to be asked at this point in the season either. I think I'm still leaning Purdy, but man, if Jefferson's playing, I'm definitely on the fence there.
Ayuk's not quite Justin Jefferson, but you also have a great play caller and a great wide receiver on that side. And they also have George Kittle. And like, yeah, he's one of the best yak tight ends, and he still looks fantastic. So I'm probably sticking with Purdy because we have a better sample size, a longer sample size of him being good. Pretty long one of Darnold not being great. So still, I'd be interested to start Darnold, and I'm keeping Purdy in my lineup. And are you worried? Would you be buying Purdy if his value goes down? Are you holding him at this point?
I mean, how much down, if I can get him for like a late first, obviously you have to do that, but I don't think I'm quite paying full price for him right now. If you need a quarterback, it might be worth reaching out. You might just be able to buy one of these guys like Darnold or Carr or Baker or something for cheaper and get the same production right now.
What about if you have Tua? What would you add to get to Purdy at this point?
You almost have to add. I mean, it depends on how that manager feels. His value is just so hard to nail down right now. I could see the Purdy manager wanting a first on top. I don't think there's any way I would do that, but I could see that being the price. I think I'd be comfortable adding a second. I'd be comfortable adding probably more than that, but I don't think that gets done.
Right, I agree because Tua's value is definitely down. I think Purdy, just in general, is probably closer to worth two firsts in that range, if not just below that. And yeah, Tua is probably worth a first at best at this point. So yeah, it probably would be a first to get up to him. All right, moving on to the Seahawks at Patriots. We have a win from Seattle in overtime 23-20. Our fantasy studs, we have Geno Smith finish as the QB7 with 327 passing yards. Zach Charbonnet, he was in as a starter because Kenneth Walker was out of the game. He was the RB8 on the week because he was very involved in the passing game. He had 5 receptions, and he also had a touchdown on the ground. DK Metcalf and JSN exploded. DK Metcalf had the touchdown, so he was the wide receiver 2 on the week with 14 targets and 129 yards. JSN had even more targets than that with 16 of them. More receptions. You got 12 receptions, 117 yards, which that was so great to see because after week 1, Tyler Lockett was much more involved. But how are you feeling about JSN right now? How are you feeling about Tyler Lockett?
I love Jason, baby. Yeah, Lockett did not have a good one. I think it's still going to bounce around a little. DK is probably going to have a bad week here or there, but man, seeing 16 targets for JSN, that's involvement right there, man. You give me double-digit targets a week, you're going to have a great season. He's a young guy. At least I've loved his whole career. I think a lot of people have been pretty high on him. Some people out on him, but this is the kind of game you want to see if you're a JSN believer. That's for sure.
I think that this Seattle Seahawks offense is very interesting, and I actually think they played two pretty good defenses here. I mean, I think the Patriots is a great defense; they looked good against them, and also the Broncos. They got some good pass rushers and Pat Surtain, so I'm pretty encouraged by the Seattle Seahawks. But on the Patriots, we have Ramondre Stevenson with another great game, 17 fantasy points. He had 21 carries, he had a touchdown, and he had 5 targets, only came away with 2 of those, unfortunately. But Hunter Henry, he had 109 receiving yards. Brissett had less than 150 passing yards, so he came away with almost all of the yards. It was crazy to see. And with the duds, we have Tyler Lockett with only 2 targets compared to 14 and 16. That's more so what I was expecting going into the year. I mean, 2 targets is a little bit lower. 16 targets is a little high, but yeah, I kind of expected JSN to take over from Tyler Lockett. I mean, I know you did too, but wow. I mean, JSN, do you think at the end of the year he's going to be valued as a top 15 dynasty wide receiver?
A pretty tough bar to clear with how much value we have at that position, but I do think it's very possible. And if I had to bet one way or the other at even money, I'd probably take the under just because I'm a value kind of guy. But I think it's going to happen. I do.
I mean, he out targeted DK Metcalf here. Metcalf didn't have a ton of targets week 1. It's not impossible that he has more receptions, more targets. I think DK Metcalf, with how explosive he is, probably more yards, more touchdowns. But yeah, I mean, this is really, really great to see. I think Geno Smith also looked good. And like I said, I think it's 2 pretty tough defenses. So honestly, if you can buy Geno Smith, if you have Tua, that's a guy that I would like to target, honestly, because he's got a great wide receiver core. I think Ryan Grubbs helped a ton. And we'll talk about the Bears more later, but Shane Waldron leaving and going to the Bears now have all kinds of protection problems, and suddenly the Seahawks don't. So I think that Ryan Grubb, he's giving answers to Geno Smith in the protection department as well as JSN, getting him open quickly. So I'm starting those guys no matter what. Tyler Lockett, probably not. He's pretty scary. Kenneth Walker, he's likely to miss a few more weeks though with his oblique injury. So Zach Charbonnet, he's also going to be in my lineup probably every single week until Kenneth Walker comes out. Because I mean, if you're getting 5 targets, 5 catches as a bigger running back, you're going to be the goal line guy and the pass catcher. Yeah, I'm going to be starting him every week. So I have him in some spots. These are just these contingent backups that you want to have. Jalen Polk, first career touchdown. Wasn't very involved outside of that, but it's good to see. And Ramondre Stevenson, are you starting him everywhere you got him?
Boy, it's hard not to at this point. If you got a really deep team, maybe not. I've got one where I've got some other options, but he's clearly the best one. I think everywhere I have him, I am starting him.
Yeah, fair enough. I have him in 2 spots, and I did not start him yet, so he's gonna be in my lineup moving forward because this Patriots team, they have a good defense, and Ramondre looks like he's getting a lot of work. Antonio Gibson, he also had a big play. I would hold on to him as a handcuff for sure if I have the space.
Yeah, I think a little surprising, but also good to see for him there. Like you said, a valuable handcuff, but not much more than that. Certainly not starting him on a what we expect still to be a pretty bad Patriots offense. But Ramondre, we're starting, probably starting Henry if you don't have a better option. That's probably it for now on that team, though. A lot of Seahawks we like. I think you hit the nail on the head with the change in OC being huge for them. And I do think we'll talk about Waldron going to the Bears here in a little bit. For now, we will talk Jets at Titans. The Jets get a close win, 24-17. Going to start off with the studs in that backfield there for the Jets. We got Brees as RB4 and Braylon Allen as RB6. We did have a very rare instance of the oldest player in the league completing a touchdown pass to the youngest player in the league, and Aaron Rodgers to Braylon Allen. Pretty cool thing to see there. I don't expect Allen's ceiling to be that high in a given week. I don't know that I'm starting him as a flex player, but he might be the most valuable backup right now. Other studs in the game, Ridley, 24.7, had a great week. And then the duds, Spears, he did have an injury, but it seems like he avoided serious injury. Only had 5.1 points, though. And DeAndre Hopkins with 1.9. Just not a great start to the season for him. We kind of expected it with that injury he got in camp. He was playing through it, so we hoped for a little bit more. First, I want to start with the backfield there. Braylon Allen, are you willing to flex him?
Probably not yet because week 1, he didn't have quite as much involvement, and it was a 2 touchdown week, but it's definitely something to monitor because 4 targets and 7 carries, if he's gonna get 10 opportunities a game, maybe, but I'm gonna need to see more.
Pollard looking great so far. Even if Spears is healthy, are you starting him pretty much everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, 17 carries. This guy looks like the leader, and this offense hasn't looked spectacular, but I think it's good enough, and I think Pollard is explosive enough that he's going to stay in my lineup. But DeAndre Hopkins, yeah, I feel like it wasn't discussed enough. It came out pretty close to the season that he was actually had an MCL tear, which it's not like an ACL tear. It's not like a full year kind of recovery. But I looked at his snap share here, and he had 27% of snaps in week 1 and 44% of snaps in week 2. This guy clearly is not fully healthy. I mean, they're limiting him because of it. If he was fully healthy, trust me, they'd be playing with 70, 80% of snaps at least. And they also had 2 really tough opponents to start out. I mean, the Jets here, they're a great defense, but I do think that the schedule with the way that is coming up now, he is a really good buy low target. Like I said, 27% of snaps to 44. Hopefully we get that up to 70%, if not, this coming week, the week after. But D Hop, he's a great player. He really is. I just think he needs to be healthy and he needs to be on the field. And when he's doing that, I think he's at least startable, even though Will Levis is, Will Levis and kind of crazy, inaccurate at times. But is Will Levis somebody that you're playing in a plus matchup over somebody like, let's say, Darnold?
I don't think so right now, as long as Jefferson's playing. If Jefferson's not playing, I think you kind of have to, but it's hard to play Levis. I've got him, I think, in just the Scott Fishbowl, and I wish I had a better QB2 option, but I don't, so I'm going to have to play him there.
Justin Herbert or Will Levis if Levis has a good matchup.
I think I'm still starting Herbert there. I need to see more from Levis in that offense before I have any confidence starting him.
I don't know, man. He just looks like he needs to really wrangle it in, and Callahan looks really pissed at him. I mean, there's a clip of him saying like, "What the f are you doing?" Because I mean, there's 2 weeks in a row he's just made some the stupidest plays that you've ever seen. Maybe they can bring that in a little bit. I mean, they brought in a lot of weapons for him, and it is still very early for him, so he could still turn it around. Don't give up on him, but hasn't been great the first 2 weeks. Moving on to Giants at Commanders in the battle of the dumpster fires here. 21-18, Washington wins, and good lord, the Giants just gave this one away. They had a chance to get an extra point to get up by 4 when Washington was only kicking field goals all day. They went for 2, didn't get it. I just thought it was insane. And then they were up by 3. Washington ties it. Whatever. The fantasy studs. Moving on to that. Daniel Jones, he's the QB6 here with 18.3 fantasy points. That's crazy. I mean, we already talked about how the quarterback position is down so far, but Malik Neighbors, holy cow, 18 targets for 127 yards and a touchdown. Terry McLaurin, another week where you're disappointed in him. He's 8.2 fantasy points. Didn't absolutely crush you, but 6 catches for only 22 yards. Cliff Kingsbury, man, he frustrates me. And just the A dot for McLaurin and all the weapons has been very, very, very low. But Jaden Daniels, it's only his first 2 games. Maybe they start to open it up more downfield later. But is McLaurin somebody that you're starting if there's 3 wide receivers and a flex?
I find it hard to believe that I couldn't have someone that's better on my bench right now. He's just not looked good. That offensive passing attack has not looked very good. I just until things change there, I really struggle to see a world where I have to start McLaurin right now.
Rashid Shaheed or McLaurin?
I'm starting Shaheed. He can win me a week. McLaurin can't right now.
What about, I don't know if you go this low, but Jalen Naylor if Jordan Addison's out?
That's a tough one. I'd have to look at matchups, but the fact that I'm even saying that is a little surprising and pretty big comment on McLaurin.
Yeah. Are you still McLaurin below Amari Cooper at this point?
I think I'd start Cooper. I still think he has a better chance of production right now, but neither have looked good.
Right? They're eerily similar right now. It stinks. But anyways, are you going to take Malik Neighbors or Garrett Wilson at this point? Because Malik Neighbors has been getting a lot of production here.
Yeah, when I put this question in the show sheet, I was hoping I was going to be asking you because, boy, you're asking me to pick between my favorite children, basically. I don't have any kids, so I don't know how that goes. But Malik Neighbors had an incredible week. Still think I got to go with GW for now. He's on a better offense. He's got a better quarterback. I think he's going to be better this year. They're both young. They're both great. If someone's going to give me a plus to go one way or the other, I'll take it and I'll go that way. But straight up, I think I'm still sticking with Wilson barely.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel Jones had 28 attempts and 18 of them went to Malik Neighbors. You got to have some other options. I mean, ice cream isn't good every single meal. You got to have other options. Man, yeah, I think that the target share has to come down. That's completely unsustainable, but it's really, really good to see from Malik Neighbors. And obviously, you're going to be starting him every single week. But Devin Singletary, Brian Robinson, and Austin Eckler, these guys are all regular RB2 flex plays, which is kind of shocking to be saying that about 2 Washington guys. But they both look good, Eckler and Brian Robinson. I mean, geez, their running game is actually really good there in Washington. And Singletary, he's just getting everything. So these guys, they're at least playable, but not exciting because both offenses aren't great. But yeah, you could do worse.
If you have them on your team, they're probably, hopefully you're a hero RB or something, and you've got a great RB1, and then you're just looking for some points from your RB2. I think the last question I have on this game here, Commanders look awful on defense. Are you just, whoever they're playing, you're just starting everyone that they're playing against that's worth starting? I mean,
I thought the defense was one of the worst coming into the year, and it looks that way still.
All right, now let's move on to the afternoon slate. We had some exciting action here. Rams at Cardinals. Another fairly surprising outcome. I'm not surprised the Cardinals won, but they won 41-10. We got Kyler as the QB1 on the week. Looks like he's back and healthy. Love to see it. Connor is RB17 doing what he does, just getting a bunch of opportunity and turning it into a decent day. Marv silencing the critics. Thank you, sir. Anyone who was down on him after week 1. Like, I don't know what happened that week, but there's no way you should have given up hope on him. He was the wide receiver 1 on the week. I think I saw something. I don't know if this is exactly what it was, but the first rookie to have 4 catches and 2 touchdowns in a quarter since his father did it. So that was pretty cool. And then Trey McBride, tight end 4. And I know you have a little discussion you want to get going on him, but let me just throw in the dud real quick. Matt Stafford, only 6.6 points. We do have some reasoning for that, which we will touch on here shortly. But let's start with that tight end discussion you wanted to have with McBride. Do you think he's tight end 1? Do you think it's Bowers, Laporta? Like, where are you at there?
Now, we talked about Brock Bowers above, and man, I mean, he's one of the best prospects that we've ever seen. Trey McBride, he's been one of the only guys drafted in the top 6 tight ends in redraft that you've really been happy to have so far. And Trey McBride, he has the second best PPR points per route run at tight end. He's just a hair behind George Kittle. And also through 2 weeks, the tight end leaders in first read target share, Trey McBride at 28% and Brock Bowers at 27%. Now, I talked about how Laporta, I'm a little bit worried about Laporta if he's going to be the third option. So honestly, man, it's crazy to say because it's only been 2 weeks, but I would put Trey McBride at tight end 1 because I already had him at tight end 2 anyways. He was right there. Brock Bowers, honestly, I think you can make a case for him being tight end 1 as well. I mean, these guys, they're both really young. They're doing incredible. But like I said, Brock Bowers is one of the best tight end prospects we've ever seen. But personally, I really, really like McBride. He was dominant down the stretch of last year. And in college, he was just like his dominator was insane. And also he's in a good offense here. So I think McBride's my tight end one in Dynasty right now.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree. I mean, but going into the season, we had McBride and Laporta as tier one tight ends. Laporta with the slight edge. Based on the start to the season, I think I agree. I'm bumping McBride up, and I do also think Bowers belongs in that tier now. I'll probably take a small plus to go in any of those three directions. I'm not giving up on Laporta, but we gotta act with the evidence we have in front of us, and right now it looks like McBride's a little better. We have one more question about the Cardinals before we shift to the discussion on the injuries with the Rams. Kyler's looked great so far. If we were to do a startup today, where do you think he goes? I mean, I can only think of like five guys that I'd put ahead of him right now.
I was gonna say QB 6 or 7. So yeah, I'm taking him ahead of Anthony Richardson, Justin Herbert. I'm taking him ahead of Caleb Williams too.
Or about Burrow?
I was about to say Jordan Love. I'm taking him above Love right now, even, and I love me some Love, unlike you. I'm just kidding. But Burrow, that's really where the line is. It's like, geez, because when you think about T. Higgins probably leaving next year and Kyler, the floor that he has every week, this rushing, I kind of do think I might go Kyler over Joe Burrow at this point.
Just for the listeners out there, I think Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, Stroud, and Lamar are the five that we have above. Is that for you as well?
Yeah, and do you think Stroud might be above Mahomes?
Not yet for me, but I think some people have it that way for sure. Yeah, just give the slight edge there to Mahomes since we've seen it for longer and we know he is who he is. So good question there, but I do want to spend a little time now talking, unfortunately, about some injuries. Puka missed this week. We knew that was going to happen, but he's on IR, and it seems like he might miss even a couple of months, probably about half the season from what I'm hearing. And unfortunately, Cooper Cup also suffered an injury. He's also going to miss a significant amount of time. So let's start with the implications of those on other important players. I want to know how big of a hit you think Kyron takes, and is Stafford even startable?
No, I don't think Stafford is startable. Honestly, if he's playing against the Commanders, probably. But in most scenarios, no, I don't think I could start Stafford because when Demarcus Robinson's your wide receiver one, and you don't have any sort of rushing floor at all, he was already kind of not a locked and load starter anyways. So yeah, I'm not starting him. And Kyron Williams, I am concerned because I thought this could be a top 5, if not top 10 offense, and this might be a little bit below average now. I'm still going to be starting him from week to week because he's getting all the touches, but it does seem like the defenses are just going to sell out to stop the run a lot more than they did before.
Yeah, and that line's not very good. So real quick before I move on, Kyron or ETN, just starting week to week, not value wise.
I'm going Kyron. I think he's getting more of the market share in that backfield.
And now the last question here I want to ask, are any of these wide receivers for the Rams worth starting while these two are out? We had Robinson with 2 catches, 50, Atwell 3 for 48, Whittington 2 for 22, and Tyler Johnson with 2 for 20.
I'm really interested to see if Whittington does get schemed up as the slot guy because I do think that with Puka being out, I don't think Whittington was going to play that role. I think the role that he could have played would be the slot one. So maybe I would speculatively add him in redraft, but in dynasty leagues, I'm probably not going to start him yet. Demarcus Robinson, Atwell, I don't think so. I mean, maybe Demarcus Robinson, but I just think that we need to see another week or two before we make any sort of starting decisions on these guys.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. You selling Whittington for a third if someone's excited about him, or are you still holding?
It's tough because this is the point. If he doesn't produce next week, then he might be worth less than a third. So I might consider it because I'm not 100% sure he can do it, but man, he also could blow up potentially. All right, moving on to the Steelers at Broncos. This was a very low scoring game. The Steelers win 13-6. And the fantasy studs, we don't have any. Literally don't have any. Fantasy duds, Justin Fields had 11.4 fantasy points. He had a passing touchdown this week, didn't have any touchdowns last week, but still, I mean, he only had 27 rushing yards, so he is a dud. Najee Harris, he had 8.4 fantasy points. That's a dud. Warren had 8.1. Pickens, I mean, he's sort of a dud. He had 4.9 fantasy points. He had 2 big plays called back due to penalty, and he had Pat Surtain covering him, which he kind of erased DK Metcalf last week, kind of erased Pickens this week. So if I have an X receiver against Surtain, I might sit him. But Bo Nix, he only had 10.3 points. It's not a guy you're probably starting. Javonte Williams, 11.5. Wasn't terrible. I mean, 5 catches, 48 yards really helped his line out a lot. But still, I mean, we didn't really see much of anything from him week 1, so I can't start him at this point. Cortland Sutton has been a big, big disappointment. Only 3.8 fantasy points, so he's not starting anywhere. Josh Reynolds honestly might be more interesting than Sutton at this point. From this point on, I mean, would you start Reynolds over Sutton if you really had to start one of these guys?
I mean, in redraft is probably the only situation I can imagine that. And yeah, I kind of think I would. It's crazy to say, but boy, that offense has just looked awful, and Reynolds is producing enough to where you can think about playing him. But like that's as far as I can get is just thinking about it.
Is anyone on the Steelers or Broncos a lineup lock? I mean, I think Pickens is probably the one.
Pickens is the closest one, and where he went in redraft, you might have some other options depending on your roster construction and dynasty. You might have some other options, but I'm not afraid of starting him. I just don't think I'd quite call him a lineup lock. And I mean, we kind of got to ask: are any Broncos even startable right now? We kind of touched on that with Reynolds versus Sutton, but I mean, even Javante doesn't look healthy like we were hoping. Nix looks inept right now. We hope he grows as a rookie, but boy, they look bad.
I mean, Bo Nix, he should have been the most quarterback ready quarterback of this entire class, man. So he could still get better, but it is hard to see. Like, I mean, honestly, he has the most starts in college football history. So that does have me worried a little bit with his age, but who knows? Sean Payton is, I think he's pretty smart. I am kind of having an open mind that this Broncos defense might be really, really good. Also, Najee Harris, he had 19 opportunities with 2 targets, 17 rushes. So he'd probably be the other guy outside of Pickens that I'm probably putting my lineup unless I have a really good option outside of that.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too there. Enough about that dreadful fantasy game. Let's move on to a bit more of an exciting one. We had Bengals at Chiefs. Chiefs win 26-25 in a bit of a controversial game, but when is it not controversial between those two teams? Fantasy studs, we listed Burrow here because he was a top 10 QB, but only 17.2 points. Could definitely have better output. I want to talk a little bit more about the QB play in general on the season here in a second. Mike Gesicki, tight end 5 on the week, 16.1 points. That's pretty good. The duds, both Moss and Brown had bad weeks. Moss with 5.7, Brown with 3.1. Jamar Chase, another bad week to start his season and a horrible penalty that, I mean, I understand it was a vicious tackle, but, he really hurt his team there. Xavier Worthy, after a great week one, only 4.2 points, kind of something we expect with his low usage, but high efficiency. So he's going to break some, but he's going to have some bad weeks. And then Travis Kelsey, only 1.6, not very good. Definitely a little concerned there. Other things, we had a couple of big injuries before we talk about some of these players. Hollywood, we know he's missed time, but he is probably out for the season. Certainly not worth considering for fantasy. He might come back towards the end of the season. And unfortunately, Isaiah Pacheco could miss a couple of months with a fractured fibula. So I guess let's start there before we talk about some of these players who actually played. You starting P. Ryan or Steele or even Kareem Hunt, who they just signed, or are we just taking a week to see what happens first? Or
I think I would definitely consider starting P Ryan if I really had to. Out of any of these guys, because Steele, I mean, he's really just been like a short yardage kind of guy. I don't think, especially because they've listed him listed as a fullback, I think that they kind of envision him more in that role. P Ryan, I mean, he's a pass catcher, and if he's going to get at least 8 to 10 touches on the ground with some receptions, he is pretty interesting because they were checking it down a lot, honestly, to Pacheco before. Kareem Hunt, I don't know. He didn't look like he had a lot of juice last year, but he knows the system. Maybe he's more so insurance, but who knows? We've seen Daryl Henderson come off the street and get a lot of touches for Sean McVay. But yeah, I'm not super interested in Hunt. I would add him in a dynasty league if I, have a deeper roster. He's probably gonna be one of the hottest waiver guys in dynasty since it's pretty barren, in dynasty from week to week. But yeah, not excited about any of these guys. I want to touch on two Chiefs that I'm a little bit worried about. Kelsey, I was worried about coming into the season. I had a long thread I put on Twitter, and he looked worse last year than he did before. So he already looked like he was in decline, and he looks pretty sluggish now, honestly. And Rashee Rice seems to be taking a lot of those short targets. And man, it's tough to just keep plugging Kelsey into your lineup, but you kind of have to for at least another week or two. But man, I wish there was a selling opportunity now because if he has a big week next week, I would be looking to sell him because I'm very, very concerned about Travis Kelsey. The other guy, Xavier Worthy, right? You guys know that I was a little bit lower on him. I mean, last week he had the rushing touchdown, which is great. I don't expect that to come a whole lot. And then the other touchdown was blown coverage, and he had 2 catches for 17 yards. I do think that him getting rushes kind of helps his floor out a little bit, but this is without Marquise Brown. So I just kind of would have hoped to see him do more. I mean, you saw him get absolutely bodied down the field. If you're getting pressed, if you're getting hands on you, you're not getting to that 4.2 speed, But anyways, he is still a rookie. He could get better. Maybe they'll use him in different ways. But Kelsey and Worthy, what do you think?
yeah, start with Kelsey here. I do think I don't remember exactly how big of a play it was, but it was a fairly big play. He had called back to penalty. But it's hard not to be worried about him. You drafted him not just to be a lineup block, but to be a real stud and a difference maker, a positional advantage kind of guy. Whether you traded for him or you drafted him, you spent a lot of capital to get him on your team. Probably you expected a lot more. Like you said, there's not even really a sell window right now. It's just kind of murky. Rashee Rice looks like the guy. I think your only option is to hold and just hope things improve a little bit. Maybe you do get a sell window. Maybe he looks better enough that he actually turns it around. He's getting up there in age, so yeah, I'm worried. On the other hand, I'm not that worried about Worthy. I knew he was going to be a boom bust player. He's young. He's still getting integrated into that offense. Yeah, he cannot deal with press at the NFL level, but he's got a coach that knows how to avoid that. So I do expect him to have some huge games. I expect him to have some horrible games as well, but that was my expectation going in. So it's hard to change my mind based on one bad game. On the other side, though, I think the main guy I want to talk about here is Jamar Chase. With his holdout, I think kind of like Ayuk, we expected a slow start. Man, it doesn't even look like they're drawing stuff up for him. Attack down the field with this guy. He's one of the best downfield route runners we've seen. Like, what are they doing?
My guess is just the fact that he had like one or two practices before the season even started. That's what I'm kind of thinking because we've seen this guy be great for so long. And also the Bengals and Joe Burrow, they seem to just get off to a slow start. So I'm not panicking. If you can buy low, I definitely would. I don't think you can, but I would at least try if somebody seems like they're worried. I'm not worried about that personally. Yoshivas, he only had two catches, but they were both touchdowns, so that's interesting. But Chase Brown at this point, I kind of just even like feel like he's a handcuff. I'm not going to try to start him probably any week this year unless he really changes our mind. Zach Moss, I think he is startable, but that's only if you really need him.
Yeah, I agree there. Just one more thing I want to touch on in this game. Steve Palazzolo, formerly of PFF, I think on the 33rd team now. Definitely someone worth following if you don't. But this information comes from him on X, talking about passing touchdowns through 2 weeks. 2019, 105. 2020, 110. 2021, 110. 2022, 105. Pretty consistent through that stretch. 2023, only 86. 2024, 69 touchdown passes through 2 weeks. So quarterback numbers are down across the board. And that's just kind of tough to see. I kind of think it's a trend that's going to stick, though. These defenses are playing not to give up the big play, and it's really hurting. Do you agree with that, or do you think I'm overreacting a little?
Yeah, no, I mean, the defenses seem like they're doing a lot better. I think that maybe teams not playing as much in preseason has a little bit to do with it. And I think that it's harder on the offense without practice time because you got to communicate pass protection and communication with that. I've seen a lot of receivers that seem like they're just not on the same page as their quarterbacks. I think it'll get better, but yeah, it could just be a little bit of a down year in general, though, even if it does improve a little bit. Now, I just want to touch on Rashee Rice because I feel like he's somebody we really need to talk about. I think he might be a top 15 dynasty wide receiver, honestly. Would you take him or Devontae Smith at this point?
I take Rice.
Drake London?
I think I'm still sticking with London right now, but it's a lot closer than I would have expected this time, 2 weeks ago.
With Tua's injury, Waddle or Rice?
I'd take Rice. I think even if Tua was healthy, though, I'd probably still take Rice. He looks good, man. I didn't put him on the studs list because he had a good game, but I expect that from him now. I think he was just outside wide receiver one. I want to say it was like wide receiver 15, if I remember correctly, but it was a good game. I think we expect that every week from him right now.
Yeah, I bought him low for second round picks.
Yeah, you beat me in a couple leagues to it. I'm pretty disappointed right now, but I was trying to buy him in both the leagues you bought him in. You had just a slightly better offer.
It's been great, great feeling. Moving on to the Bears at Texans. The Texans win 19-13. Fantasy studs, my guy Nico Collins. Let's go. 27.5 fantasy points, wide receiver 4. He had 10 targets for 135 yards and a touchdown. Fantasy duds, Caleb Williams, 9.4 points. DeAndre Swift had 8.2. Adunze had 5.3. I do think that him playing with the knee injury, he just didn't look quite the same. Stephon Diggs, 7.7. He had two touchdowns last week, but the usage is about the same. I think he had about 30 yards last week as well. So I'm a little bit worried about Stephon Diggs. Tank Dell, he only had 4 targets, 1 catch, and -3 yards. He did get some carries actually, but why don't we just go ahead and talk about the Texans though? Because I still like Dell more than Stephon Diggs for this year. I mean, maybe after the first 2 weeks, most people will be on the other side of that. But I just think that Dell's better, and I am worried about Diggs because Dell he has just missed on a couple of big plays in week 1 and week 2. And man, I don't know if that's something to do with Tank Dell or if it's just been bad luck.
Yeah, I agree with you on being more worried about Diggs. I'm disappointed in Dell. I'm not mad at you. I'm just disappointed. No. Look, I think it's pretty clear that Nico's the guy there, even if Dell bounces back, which I do really expect. I think he's a great buy low candidate. I still think even from this point on, it's very unlikely Dell outscores Nico, but I do think it's going to be so much closer than it has been. Diggs being there kind of muddies things up. He's going to have his weeks, but like you said, even last week with his two tutties, he was still not a great game outside of that. Dell's usage is still there. We know Stroud loves him. I expect the target share to increase. So, I would inquire about him. I'm a little worried starting him week to week right now, but also his big playability, like you said, he just missed on a couple. Probably not pulling him from my lineups quite yet.
Tank Dell has 86% route participation and Nico Collins is 88. So they're neck and neck with route participation. He's on the field. And I do think that, I mean, wide receivers are just inconsistent in general. It's probably going to be even more inconsistent for him since there is, Nico and Diggs. But I think long term, I really, really like Dell. And I think he's definitely going to be better than he has been. So definitely buy him low if you can. Are you taking Nico Collins or Puka Nakua at this point? Because Nico's been a stud. I think he might finish as a top 8 dynasty wide receiver at the end of the year if he continues to be great. But I think this is a good discussion.
It's hard to answer that. If you're competing this year, it's hard not to say Nico. It really is. He's putting up huge numbers. He's still fairly young. He's connected to a great young quarterback. I think if you're rebuilding, it's worth exploring Nico for Puka because I do think long term Puka has the same, if not more, upside. But like I said, if you're competing, man, it's hard not to take Nico at this point. I kind of think, and I'll kind of expand the question for you here. I kind of think Nico's worked his way into that tier with AJB, Garrett Wilson, Puka, guys like that. So I'm taking him over London. I'm taking him over Olave right now, but that one's close for me. But I do think so. How about you? Are you there with me? I mean, you're the Nico guy.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and I would kind of even push back that Nico's ceiling isn't as high as Puka's because Puka's like analytically, if you're looking at analytics for stats, yeah, Puka was one of the best, ever. But Nico, I mean, he wins contested balls, he gets yak. We saw reception perception, one of the best route runners, and he seems like he has got a top 5 passer for the next 4 years or so. So, man, yeah, I really like Nico. Honestly, I might like him in 2025, 2026 better because Stafford is kind of a question mark to me. But Cooper Cup is probably going to be leaving, right? So that is a little bit in Puka's favor. I mean, not leaving, but starting to decline. But Puka's also had injury concerns. And is Stafford, is he going to be here in 2025? If he is, I don't know about the next year. So I kind of like Nico more than Puka at this point. Not more than Garrett Wilson, because Garrett Wilson, I think, is a stud. But A.G. Brown, I don't know, man. It's pretty tough because Nico's younger. I like Stroud as a passer more. That's a tough question. I don't know if I quite do that yet, but man, I don't think I'd sell Nico for AJ Brown.
Yeah, I think maybe putting Garrett Wilson in that was not accurate because I think he's more with like Malik Neighbors and maybe if you drop Chase, maybe him, Marv if you haven't moved him into tier one. But I think the conversation is great. And, like I was kind of down on Nico compared to his value. And like Jamison Williams, I'm changing my stance. We got to react to the evidence we see on the field. And not just last year, but continuing it into this year. It's hard not to put Nico up there with the other elite wide receivers.
I'm running my victory lap.
Yeah, be careful doing that because hubris can come back for you. But hard not to understand why. One more thing I do want to touch on real quick before we move on: the Mixon injury. He did leave. Was that a hip drop tackle that didn't get called? It was correct. Yeah. Thankfully, it looks like he avoided anything serious. His game status for this week, though, currently unknown. I think Akers probably the guy that you consider starting if Mixon misses a week.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, Dameon Pierce when he hasn't looked great, and there's not even a 100% chance that Dameon Pierce is going to play this week, actually, with an injury himself. So, yeah, Akers, he looks like a guy that you can start. And if you really need him, I don't know if I'm going to be saying he's a lock, but yeah, if you need to, sure. I mean, in the Bears, I don't think we really need to talk about them a whole lot, but the offensive line looks really bad, very bad. I mean, we thought this was going to be a great ecosystem, but we already see Keenan Allen's dealing with a heel injury. So he might be out a while. Dunze's playing through an MCL. I mean, he's probably fine next week. DJ Moore, pretty worried about him. I'm not starting anybody probably on this team. Maybe Swift, but still probably not. But DJ Moore would be the one. How do you feel about DJ Moore real quick?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of still got to start him for now and hope things get better. Like you said, with the Dunze's injury, I'm not too worried about him long term. I think Keenan Allen gets healthy. You got to consider starting him also. And then I just want to make one comment that's not really a fantasy comment so much as it is a football one. I just don't understand the mindset of taking a quarterback in the first round, keeping a lame duck head coach, bringing in a crappy offensive coordinator. Like you're guaranteeing a rough year one probably, and then you're almost guaranteeing a new offensive system in year two for that quarterback. Just cut the cord with Eberflus, hire someone who you think can come in and grow with your young quarterback. I just don't get it. We see it every year though.
Yeah, the Shane Waldron part, that's the part that I think he's terrible. Because I mean, as soon as he leaves Seattle, I mean, maybe Ryan Grubb is just amazing, but he leaves Seattle and this protection problems that plagued them all year long are gone, and now they're on the Bears. So I just don't think that he gives the answers in protection. I mean, if they have the offensive line getting just absolutely demolished, you got to get guys chipping. You got to put in another tight end. I mean, I'm not giving him any help. So Caleb Williams, I'm not starting him for sure. I hope that they turn it around. Might have to wait until Keenan Allen gets back for that to happen, and hopefully that's not something super long term.
Yeah, definitely a disappointing start for the Bears, but kind of like to see that as a Packers fan. Don't like to see the injury side of it, but do like to see the struggles on the field. Moving on to our final game in week 2, we had a pretty fun Monday night football game. Falcons at Eagles. Falcons pull it out 22-21. Eagles throwing for some reason when they've been running so well on a third and short when they could have closed the game out, giving the Falcons a chance, which they took advantage of. I know you're happy about that, but let's just jump on in. Cousins with a pretty good week, especially compared to week 1. He finishes QB8. Darnell Mooney, not necessarily a huge blow up week, but for Darnell Mooney, 17.8 PPR points, pretty darn good. Saquon at RB9, kind of what you expect, but still RB9 worth mentioning here. Devonta Smith, only wide receiver 14, but he did eclipse 20 points, which is definitely a great week. And on the other side of the coin, the only real dud I want to mention is Kyle Pitts. Another bad week, only 5 points, tight end 21. So before we jump into the injury news, let's go ahead and open the discussion for the game. I know you're happy about your Falcons, so if you want to start there, go ahead.
I mean, after week 1, the offense was looking really concerning, especially with Kirk Cousins. But the second week, things definitely started to improve. And Zach Robinson, he hasn't had Drake London just sitting out on an island at X. They're moving him around. Kirk Cousins looked better. They started to actually get play action going, which they didn't in week 1. So it is hard to make the assumptions on Kyle Pitts yet because week 1, he had a touchdown. But outside of that, it wasn't great. This week, it wasn't great. That is concerning, but I do think that things are just going to get better and better. There's so much new. Kirk Cousins is new. The offensive coordinator is new. The head coach. I mean, Darnell Mooney. They didn't return a single wide receiver from last year's team outside of Drake London. So London, there's at least some more hope. But if it wasn't for the last drive, we would have been also talking about him again about how he wasn't very good. So Drake London, I'm at least have some hope now. Kyle Pitts, I'm concerned about, but just this offense in general, I just think you actually have hope for it. Bijan Robinson is a stud. He's a top 3 running back play. You're never going to take him out of your lineup. He's getting so much opportunity, and he looks great.
Yeah, the only thing I want to touch on there, I'm glad you brought up Bijan because I just left him off the stud list because it's kind of what we expected. He had a good game, but it wasn't quite a blow up week or anything. And a little different from week 1. Tyler Algier did have some opportunity. I believe it was 19 touches to 10 Bijan to Algier. As someone who needed a huge week from Bijan to win in a league, I was a little disappointed every time we saw 25 out there, but he did look pretty good, so I understand it. I think the Falcons had a nice bounce back. We like to see that. And then the Eagles, look, Hurts had a good game. Barkley had a good game. Smith had a good game. We expected that, but just some questionable coaching decisions, not really fantasy impact, but they really should have walked away with the win in this one. So you're an Eagles fan, kind of disappointing, but do want to move in now to the A.J. Brown news. He had a hamstring injury pop up during the week in practice, ended up getting ruled out. I believe it was on Saturday or Sunday early in the day, early enough that you could make an adjustment to your fantasy lineup, thankfully. But it sounds like he might miss another week or two. I don't know. You worried about AJB long term this season, or you think he's just going to hop back on the wide receiver 1 train once he's back out there?
I think that AJ Brown, he said himself that he's going to miss a few weeks. I don't know if that was including, this week too. So from that, it sounds like it's probably week 5 or 6 until he comes back. So that really does stink. But Devonta Smith is he's probably a smash start while AJ Brown is out. Dallas Goddard, you thought that maybe he could step up, but no, he did not. Jahan Dotson did not. So those guys are not going to be in anybody's lineup. Saquon Barkley, though, I mean, he didn't get a touchdown and he still got 17 points. It's similar to Bijan Robinson. I mean, these guys, they don't need touchdowns to be good. And when they do get a touchdown, they're borderline week winners. So, yeah, Saquon looks great. I mean, they were just pounding the rock and they were doing it successfully, whether it was Hurts, whether it was Barkley. Hurts, I don't think he's looked like absolutely incredible as a passer. He's been fine, but we don't need him to be a great passer because 85 rushing yards here and a rushing touchdown. So Hurts, Saquon, and Devonta Smith are smashes right now. AJ Brown, I mean, maybe I would buy him low if you can. I don't know if you can though.
Yeah, it's hard to buy a guy like that low, especially when we expect it to only be a couple week injury. Like you said, Hurts hasn't looked great throwing it, but he's looked kind of like he has. And it looks like the tush push is still a huge part of that team. So, I think he still has QB1 overall on the season upside. Definitely nice to see the Falcons rebound. Nice to see our Eagles studs still perform well. Wish we would have seen a better game from Pitts, but you can't win them all, I guess.
Yeah, right. I mean, 3 catches for 20 yards. It does stink, but I mean, I think Kirk Cousins, he seems like he's just shaking that rust off. So I wouldn't give up hope yet on Kyle Pitts.
All right. And, you know, it was a long one. So if you're still around, thanks for sticking with us. Would love to hear in the comments. This is our first season doing content in season for Dynasty. So if you have any tips on how we could provide better advice, insight, analysis for you guys, please drop that in the comments below. You know, for now, we're going to keep playing with it in our own way. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dino Construction Podcast. We hope you found this as useful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you view. And from all of us here at Dino Construction, until next time.